Welcome to the NYU STEINHARDT Jazz Interview Series, and today we have Danish guitar player and ECM artist Jakob Bro.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thanks a lot.
And you're playing here in the city this week?
Yeah, I'm playing at the Jazz Standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been checking out all of your music, along with the ECM music, your work with Palle Motian and the Electric Bebop Band, and Tomasz Stanko.
Yes.
And it seems to me that there's a progression of development, because I was listening to your work with Palle Motian, and it sounds like that band you were using more jazz vocabulary that would be maybe in the tradition that we know here in America. And maybe you've decided to, well, I have two questions for you. You've decided to, pursue other fields, other paths, but as well as we want to maybe define what does it mean to be on the ECM label. Maybe that has something to do with this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a while ago now that I was playing with Paul, and
2003.
Yeah, 4 and 5 or something. And I was very young at that time, so it was kind of like I got that offer sort of out of the blue, and it was maybe it will always be like the high point of my sort of musical career, playing with.
How did that happen that you connected with Paul?
Oh man, that's kind of a long story, but I guess well, there was I think the main reason was that there was a Danish bass player called Anders Christensen who was at that time he was living in, I think he was living in London or Denmark, but anyway, he was going to New York to do a recording with a Danish saxophone player, together with Palle Motian and Kurt Rosenwinkel. And at that session, Paul was looking for an electric bass player that could sort of replace Steve Swallow on a tour or something. And then, hearing my friend Anders play the upright, he would stop after one song and ask him if he also played the electric. And he was, of course, said yes, and then he got the gig. And that sort of, I think that was what brought me sort of close to Palle Motian in a way, because I was good friends with Anders, and he was on tour with the Bebop Band, and Paul would usually at the end of tours ask the band if they could do a new round of dates, I don't know, 6 months from, a year from where they were at. And then if people could do it, he would, ask the booking agency to go ahead and start working. And I think Ben Monder, who was in the band at that time, he had like a conflict. That's what I heard. Like one date he wasn't able to do from the dates that Paul was suggesting. And that was sort of an opening.
Did that knock him out because he couldn't do one date?
For that tour, yeah, it did. I think Paul was quite old school like that. He was going out, and the easiest for him was that everybody in the band was sort of there for the entire period. It would, and then so Anders would suggest me at that time, and also I had been living in New York a few years at that time, and I was good friends with Chris Cheek and Steve Cardenas and Kurt Rosenwinkel and many of the people who were also in the band. So I guess, it sort of happened like that.
And how did that assist you in your career at all, working with Palle Motian?
I'm still sort of it's like I'm not recovering from that, but it's something that's still like. All the things that I experienced with Paul and on so many levels are still sort of with me, and they will always be with me. But when you asked about my guitar playing, I mean, I was very young, and I was at that time. I mean, it's a gig that I would have loved to have also later in my life. But what do? I mean, you got the call from promotion, so you say yes, of course, even though at that time I didn't feel ready at all. And so it's like a progress. I think I was learning a lot playing with him, also trying to fit in a band where there was one other guitar player and two horn players, and so in that way that also affected my guitar playing at that time. Like the stretching was that was happening on a different sort of level than when you were listening to his trio with Frisell and Lovano, for instance. But that I'm grateful for, because that was nice for me, that it was sort of small portions here and there. Play one chorus here or 8 bars here.
How much direction did Paul give?
Well, not that much. I mean, he liked the arrangements to be sort of clear with that band, at least to begin with. When I started playing with him, he was concerned that, because we were so many soloists, he wanted it to be sort of organized in a way. And Steve Cardenas was the one that sort of he kind of knew the whole setup somehow. So Paul would like ask Steve, well, hey, I don't remember what do we do on Brilliant Corners? Who's the first soloist? And so Steve would always have everything sort of together. But other than that, he was fantastic. Of course, I mean, I was standing next to him because I was the guitar player in the band that played the least loud. So that's why I sort of got that spot. And that was for me, it was perfect, because I could stand there and get that energy, the sound of his cymbals and drums and his swing and his time feel. I mean, I could, he could wash me in that. That's something I feel like is still a part of me.
Now, one more question on Paul. He was kind of cryptic to his audiences and to fans. He was kind of a private person, it seemed. Was he open with talking with the band and telling stories about his life, and maybe work with Bill Evans and Keith Jarrett and things like that?
Yeah, I think he was being quite open and about. He would tell stories about his life and his the different collaborations and stuff. Yeah, for sure. And that was also a part of the learning process for me. Hearing Paul talk about Mingus and Monk, and he talked about. I mean, I have to get this straight. He talked about Billie Holiday kissing his hand at some point and stuff. Stories that would just like, for me, it would, the people he was talking about was history. It was like talking about Bach or Beethoven or something. And all of a sudden there was a person that had been close to that scene, and for me that sort of, it was overwhelming, and at the same time just so incredible, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let me move in this direction for a minute. I've done interviews with John Abercrombie and Bill Frisell.
Yeah.
And I can hear those influences in your playing. And Abercrombie told me that he moved to New York in the late '60s and started going to jam sessions and connected with a young record producer, Manfred Eicher, at jam sessions. And when he started working with ECM early on, he said he had to develop a new language, a different approach to what he had learned here in America. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think I've never really thought about it like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of diversity on that label somehow, but it's.
But I think early on is what we're talking about. Because he had mentioned Jan Gabarek, and he says Jan could play just like Coltrane in the jazz language here, but he maybe chose not to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still sort of like, I'm always sort of like searching. I don't really feel like I found my sound or my way of playing or anything this point, but for a long time I didn't record so many records where the guitar and was sort of in focus. I was more interested in creating music for the sake of creating music, basically. And ECM, and when I got in touch with ECM, that was sort of still the case. I was playing with Paul Motion, of course, and had this sideman gig with Stanko as well. But when Manfred offered me like a recording under my own name, and he wanted it to be a trio album, that was like I don't know if you call it like a game changer. It was definitely like a sort of like a milestone for me, because I was sort of forced to see my instrument and think about it as a sort of more central part of the sound picture that we were going to create in the studio. And I wasn't actually sure if I could first of all hear that, and if I wanted to create some sort of painting with this format, like bass, drums, and guitar. Mm-hmm. So that sort of it was really important for me. We went into the studio, and before that I had prepared some songs, and him being there, we were recording in Oslo. Jan Erik Kongshaug was the engineer, and it was really it was quite tricky for me somehow. Jon Christensen on drums, who had been on like hundreds of ECM albums. So I felt like there was a lot of ghosts in the room somehow. Mm. And how do you navigate in that and while creating music? But anyway, I didn't listen to that recordings or the like the raw mix until like 6 months after the actual recording, because I thought it was just like not there. Every time I heard a note, I would I would think, shit, that sounds like Abraham. That's Metheny, that's Frisell, I couldn't listen to the music.
Was there any editing in the music?
No, not as far as I remember. And then when we mixed, a time had gone by, and I was I remember all of a sudden listening to it listening to it as music, and I was fortunately pleasantly surprised, and I could see that this could sort of lead my music into a new direction somehow. That I've sort of found a way also to have the guitar more in more in focus somehow, which was So Manfred helped me a lot in that sense. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Well, the reason I say is, was there any editing or mixing? I had interviewed Ralph Towner a few years ago, and he said early on there was no editing. It's like you got what you got, first take, maybe second take. And he said that when he would play records for friends at his house, he knew that there was a space coming up where he played a bad note, and he'd say something, "Have some more coffee."
Sure. Yeah, I know that feeling for sure.
So is there no negotiation, say, you know what, I can fix this, can be better here, let's...
No. That has always been... I mean, I trust Manfred in that sense. I also remember when we were recording with Stanko, and there was... I remember 1 or 2 places where Tomasz was not satisfied with the note, and Manfred was... he was very determined that was part of the music, and that was going to eventually grow into something that would also make it special somehow. And I have to say that I think he was right. I mean, some of those places where you would in the studio think, oh, we have to fix that, it's not correct. Then listening to it a year later, it's sort of part of what makes the music come alive also, that you can hear it's actually played by real human beings. And but also I remember doing Paul Motion's album, and at that time I was, like I said, I was very young, and when I had been recording prior to that in Denmark, we did a take, we would go out and listen, and is this okay, or is it? And obviously with Paul Motion's band, that was not the case. I couldn't, go out to the listening room and ask James Farber could you rewind? I need to hear if my 8 bars of soloing are okay here, like with Jerome Harris and Tony Malaby and Cheek and Ben Mond and Steve Cardenas, Manfred Eicher in the room. It was just like, you just gotta sort of pray that you didn't fuck it up.
So you become an innocent bystander at that point. Yes.
But also a very young musician who just learned incredibly amount of things from being there somehow. So it's
well, those records I find are a lot different from your new records. Bay of Rainbows, for instance, and coincidentally enough, it's a live record, so you can't really go back and fix things.
True.
But playing live, knowing that you're recording live, do you tend not to take more chances, or what's your theory there?
I mean, the reason why I'd like to do this live album was because my trio with Joey Barron and Thomas Morgan have been just touring, playing 50, 60 concerts per year for the last many years, and somehow we just, like, each night we would go off stage and I would be like, wow, that was really interesting. We went off to somehow uncharted territory, and I would always think that would be sort of a nice thing to be able to capture on an album also. Like going into a studio situation, I would always bring in new compositions, and we would sort of work on them, try to make them come alive in the studio together with Manfred. But the live, I'm using my back catalog, and we all really like to improvise in my trio, and Joey and Thomas are incredible listeners and very they have great imagination, and so it's and Thomas, I mean, he knows, I would say he knows 40, 50 of my older songs. So this means that we can I can do basically whatever I feel like on stage with this band. I can go into any song I'd like to go into, and we might end up in a improvised part where, say we end up in an improvised part that has a key to it, and I can pick a song, any key, and just start playing it, and Thomas will be there, and so it gives me a lot of freedom, and I just wanted to try and capture that.
Well, let's talk about that freedom and what your music sounds like, because if you look at your Wikipedia page, it describes your music as jazz.
Yeah.
So as we know, there's many forms of jazz.
Yes.
And but how would you describe your music?
I would describe my music as, well, it's difficult, but I think it's a mix of many elements. I love songs and I love songwriting a lot, but I also love I also like the openness of improvisations, and I like many different. I mean, I don't like genres. I like so much music, like electronic music, classical music, jazz, rock. I'm listening to a lot of different music, and I think it's all sort of slowly coming together. It's not there yet, but I feel like it's somehow getting closer and closer. But for sure, the big challenge for me, and the main thing about my trio, I think, is to mix my sort of desire to create beauty with the fact that I don't want any rules. And I did a trilogy with Lee Konitz and also Bill Frisell on guitar, and Thomas Morgan and Ben Street is playing on some of them. Paul Motion is one of those albums. Craig Taborn. And the first album we did in 2000, I think it was 2008, I just loved the sound of those instruments together and the sound of the compositions being played in this setting somehow. With my trio, taking those same compositions, I have to be able to let go of my sort of expectations to what this these compositions are and what they can, and instead open up to the fact that they can be also a lot of other things. And and playing live, that that thing is necessary for me. I've played in rock bands also, and that was what I was missing every time I went off stage. I was like, it sounded good. We had a great sound engineer. We all played our parts and then some, and the audience were happy. But I didn't feel like we had been completely true to our ears and to where the music could have taken us somehow. And yeah.
Well, the recent recordings I've heard of you on ECM with Bay of Rainbows is the latest one.
Yeah.
It sounds like, how would you describe it? It sounds more like landscapes and layers rather than melodic shapes, and it sounds more like emotions. And it sounds like maybe it's for me, it was very calming music and very delicate music. So I'm wondering who the listeners are who follow you. And
well, that's a good question. Somehow, no matter like what the setting I put my songs into, that's often what people are saying about it. It's like calm and it's soothing in a way. And like even when I play with I have like a quintet with Andrew D'Angelo and Chris Speed and a saxophone player called Jesper Zeuthen in Denmark, and it's kind of a, like I'd say a harsh sounding group because everybody has such a personal sound, but still the songs are somehow I guess indicating what you're saying also, that it's sort of calm and meditative, and I don't know, it's difficult I think to talk about somehow.
But does that approach to music, these compositions, do they have like any form of ECM stamp on them? They're from that genre or that approach?
Not really. Paul Motian's way of writing was, of course, when he started bringing in his own songs in the Electric Bebop Band. That was kind of a revelation for me. Like he would bring in drum music and etude, and we played arabesque and all kinds of different songs of his, and that really that sort of, for me, bridged the fact that I was, at that time also listening to Neil Young, and I was listening to Mark Hollis, and I was listening to Boards of Canada, and I was listening to but Paul's way of writing sort of made it possible for me to feel like I could create like music that that didn't exactly. I didn't need to have a voice like those guys I just mentioned. It was okay that it was instrumental, but some of the vibe and some of the atmospheres that I loved from some of the other music I was listening to was sort of. And Paul really helped me in that sense, somehow finding a way to get over there. And then I think my songs have changed. Like I have some old composition from back then, and it's pretty clear that I was inspired by Paul and the way he was writing, both harmonically and also rhythmically. And then it took me like a long time, of course, to try to find my own voice in that, and which I guess is the way I hear it. It's a little bit more. It's got less edge somehow than Paul's songs do.
Well, how difficult do you think it is for guitar players to find a unique voice? It's kind of this tactile instrument. It's no wind. There's no that type of expression. It all has to come from an amp and pedals and strings and.
That's difficult, I think. And if you go into like your musical life and musical career with the aim of finding your own voice on the guitar, being afraid of copying people, learning from people, then it's gonna be you're gonna have a long and tough life.
Yes.
Because it's like, I remember early, I think it was actually, I mean, John Abercrombie was one of the big reasons why I actually moved to the States, and he was at this place called Vallekilde, it's a summer camp in Denmark, together with Michael Brecker and Danilo Perez. And John was talking about, he was talking about how you could learn from each other, and it wasn't a bad thing to transcribe musicians. And and a lot of students were talking about, what if I transcribe too much of what I love? Is that going to come out in my own playing? And he was sort of like killing that and saying, that's the way you learn. And
well, in talking in my interviews with him, he would say that when he was a young guitarist living in Boston, he wanted to sound like Wes Montgomery, and then technology changed him with wah-wah pedal and fusion music.
Yeah.
So maybe there's other things that will be introduced into your life.
Yeah, definitely. But for me, there's also a lot of beauty in the fact that you can recognize people in, like I was listening to this album with Gary Peacock and Stanko and Gabarek the other day, and I was really hearing a lot of like the band with Ornette and Don Cherry, and it's not for me it's a good thing. I really love the fact that to see that, like the jazz tree somehow, and you can hear where people are coming from, and it's a nice thing. But I mean, me and finding my own voice, I don't think I'm there yet at all. It's something, I think it's something that's gonna take a whole life first of all, and also I think it's, for me to be able to see that, I also need to get away from my own music. So I'm probably, like, I'm picturing myself being 80 or something and haven't played for a few years, and then all of a sudden listening, and then, oh yeah, maybe there was something to, I hope that's how it's gonna.
So I guess what we're getting at is there a point where people will do a blindfold test on you and say, oh, that's Bro?
Yeah, maybe. But I think for me, it's, at least where I'm at right now, it's and the way I hear my music, it's a mix between my way of playing the guitar, my way of arranging, and my way of composing. It's not just my guitar playing. That's like, it sort of goes hand in hand. I think it's the music I try to create, and I'd like to see that as a whole somehow.
Do you have a concept of, I'm writing this music because my audience will like this music, or you're writing music that this is my next level of development, this is what I want to write, and hopefully my audience will appreciate that?
Yeah. I mean, I've never done anything in terms of what I would expect people to want from me. I can't work like that at all.
But you did re-record your tune Copenhagen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but that was not with that intention. It was just because it just turned out nicely, I think, and different with Joey on drums then.
A couple of years ago, I interviewed John McLaughlin right here, and I said, when you first developed Mahavishnu Orchestra, it was an instant success, and he says, yes, unfortunately, because he was trapped, and that's what the audiences wanted to hear. Yeah. And then everybody else was copying that same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it happened to me a lot when I was like after I did my trilogy with Lee Konitz, especially at that time, because I wasn't playing so much abroad, so I was playing a lot in Denmark, and I would get a lot of concerts and come out to play, and then entering the venue, you could hear Balladeering play in the background with Lee Konitz and Frisell and Motian, and people would line up to come and hear this concert. I'm just like, we're going to play something completely different. But people were definitely expecting me to sort of reproduce that sound. So there was a period of, I guess, 4 or 5 years or something where that was, I don't want to say haunting me, but it was definitely like in my tail somehow. The worst experience I think was we were playing in a museum with a quartet I had with a poet and a bass player and a saxophone player and Nikolaj Munch Hansen and Jesper Zeuthen, and it was very like improvised and abstract music, and the audience were all like I think like plus 70 I would say, and really expecting to hear like the beautiful music that I was known for. and that was just like what could we do? I mean, that was what we were.
You didn't shift gears and go into
no,
something. Yeah.
No. I'd rather just stay with what we were gonna do, and then people have to figure out what they want to do.
That's the artist's, I guess, opportunity to choose. Is this music that I'm trying to present and explore, or people just fall back on what I've done?
Yeah. Plus, I mean, for me if I were the listener, I would be okay with getting surprises like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I didn't expect this, but it was 1 hour of my life, and I got something else out of it, that's cool.
I always think about John Coltrane in the early 60s when he came out with a record with Johnny Hartman, all these beautiful standards that he's just playing very lovely. And so people would buy that record and some guy would say, oh, John Coltrane's playing at the Vanguard. I'm going to go bring my date.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking it's going to be, they say that falling in love is wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's... I wish that was me. I could go there. But also, I was just thinking about what you said about finding your own voice. I mean, I started out playing trumpet. That was my instrument when I was a child, and my father had a big band. And so I grew up with Louis Armstrong, which was my dad's big hero. Ellington, Count Basie. We had all instruments in the house, like piano and clarinet and trombone, saxophone. So we had a music room, and
Was there a guitar?
There was a guitar, yeah, okay. But that was mostly used for. My dad loved. He loved this Danish folk singer called Paul Dissing. So I mean, that was. Nina Simone was a big heroine, I guess. But anyway, I was growing up with jazz in a more classic sense, I guess. And at some point, I listened to Jimi Hendrix and was blown away by that and wanted to play the guitar. So I did make a switch, and pretty quickly afterwards, the jazz music kept like drawing me back somehow, and I felt like I was stuck with an instrument that didn't fit in that universe somehow. So I was listening to, trying to expand my jazz history, and I was listening to Miles and Monk and Coltrane and Billie Holiday, but the guitar players were not really there for me at that time. I was really fascinated by the more classic, I guess, I don't know if you can even call it that, but for me, different instruments, the more acoustic sounding instruments. Then Scofield was my first big hero, I guess, because he had such a personal approach, I think, and I had no idea what he was doing. I was just like, okay, this I could see myself going that direction. Pat Metheny, of course, and then slowly adding on to like Frisell, Abercrombie, etc. But I still sort of wanted to quit the instrument. I still wanted to. I was dying to play the saxophone. And I was dying to play the double bass, and to have a more set role in the music that I was participating in my hometown. It felt like the guitar was always in the way somehow.
Wow.
And
you reminded me of a story. I interviewed Kenny Burrell
a
few years ago, and he said he wanted to be a saxophone player.
Okay, yeah.
Because where he was living in Detroit, everybody played saxophone. Lester Young, Charlie Parker, all these guys came through town. but this was during the war years, and they took all the metal and they collected it for the war effort. That included saxophones.
Yeah, okay.
So the only thing left was his brother's guitar.
That's funny. Yeah, but it's like Lester Young, Charlie Parker. I remember I quit high school and made the decision to become a professional musician. I was like 16 or something, and I was really running fast, and sometimes I was getting up early in the morning practicing. And I remember one class there was a saxophone player there, and I had just transcribed the Lester Young solo, and I was really excited about it. And then he just like said, out of like pretty dry, he just said that, yeah, it's cool, but it's never gonna sound as good on guitar as it does on saxophone. And man, that was just like, it was so painful, because that was how I felt also. But I felt like I was sort of trapped, because going to another instrument at that time, having spent so much of my time with the guitar, I was afraid that I had, it would be wasted somehow, and I wouldn't be able to make it in a business that's, it was a big step for me to make the decision to become a musician.
So in Denmark, as you were saying earlier, it's a very small community, and so was there guitar competition for you?
Yeah, sure. There was good guitar players at that time. Yeah, but not. I mean, I was growing up in Aarhus, and I pretty quickly found some kids my own age that I could play with and develop together with. After going to, like, I got a letter from Abercrombie actually after I met him in Denmark. He sent me a letter, and that letter sort of like, it was a big deal for me to receive that, and he said something that with kind of like a recommendation. If I went to the US to study blah blah, I could become a world-class musician or something like that, and that made me quit not just high school but also the conservatory I was studying at that time, aiming to go to the US. But right before doing that, I had to find some money to go. So I was applying for private funding in Denmark, and at the same time I was playing with a trío in Denmark that with the bass player, a drummer that the same age as me, and we would play every day from I guess 9 in the morning till 3 non-stop basically. For I guess around a year I think we were doing that, and that was sort of that's sort of hard to compete with, like in a small town like Aarhus where I come from. If you have two friends and we're all able to just take every time we have and put it into music, it's gonna go fast somehow. So we quickly sort of found a place for us to be somehow in that city. And then I mean that was the first. I guess it was an important thing for me also, because playing so much with a band, we found a way of expressing ourselves. I don't have tapes of it anymore, but the feeling of being able to express something with music and with sound was definitely a big part of like the reason why I wanted to continue with music.
How do you think that affects people now? Instrumental music, sounds and loops and everything we hear in modern music compared to what we hear in pop music, which is vocal expression. There's a big play here commercially. There's television shows that it's all about voice and pop music, and there's a whole, for me and for my program here, there's a whole different feeling for instrumental music, and what there's a term, non-discursive syntax, meaning it's like you don't speak about it, you just hear it and try to access it and absorb it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess it does. I mean, of course, it might take a little more effort from the listener to find the same joy. I don't know. It's but for me, like hearing like I mentioned Neil Young before, mention Nina Simone again, or Joni Mitchell, or it's not about for me it's not about the words, it's about the expression.
Mm-hmm.
So if I hear Nina Simone and I'm touched by that, I'm touched the same way as if I'm hearing Coltrane, or if I'm hearing it's little things, like if you hear Miles, the way he's holding a note and the way he gets out of a note, or small things that all of a sudden, like your skin starts to be, oh, what was that?
Right.
And that's for me, that's the same if it's with or without vocal. Somehow it's.
Now let me move from continent to continent. Is there a different feeling and appreciation for music that either you play or you experience in Europe as compared to what you've experienced here? As far as the audience. I mean, I think every night when you're out playing is sort of different, and the audience changes. And but I've had great experiences, basically all over the world. I mean, and for me now this is my first real US tour as a band leader, and that's I'm meeting a lot of sort of love and warmth. Mm-hmm. Playing concerts here, for sure. People, I feel like a lot of people come out because they know the records, but also I feel that they are open to us experimenting and trying to find new ways of playing the same material. So yeah, no, I don't think there's a big difference. It's somehow like it feels a little bit like it's like a family of listeners. So the people who come out to listen in Copenhagen, or if you play in Oslo, or if you play in Reykjavik, or it's like they're part of the same family as the people that are interested in this music in New York somehow, or in Minneapolis, or Winnipeg, or Tokyo. Or I mean, it's so there's still listeners that are universal. They have the same interest.
Yeah, I feel like it. Yeah.
So one more thing I want to ask you about pedals and such.
Oh, yeah.
Bill Frisell told me that he started playing using pedals, not thinking guitaristically, but he said this one pedal sound kind of reminded him of Freddie Hubbard.
Oh yeah.
So do you have those same feelings, or you just plug in?
No, I mean it's definitely. Like speaking about how I thought the guitar was a weird instrument somehow, and fitting into to the sound that I'd like to produce. Of course, the instruments, though the effects are somehow a way of translating, I think, the things I'm hearing, and it's never like one to one. It's not like, okay, here's a piano sound, and I can press this pedal and then my guitar is going to sound like a piano, of course. But the percussive sound from a piano, I can get that from a pedal, and the sustained sound from a horn, I can also get that via a pedal. So for sure, I think there's the pedals are sort of helping me to translate some of the sounds I'm hearing also in the instruments that I always dreamt of playing. But with that said, it's not. I mean, I'm not at this point. I'm not. I'm actually happy that I stayed with the guitar, because I think that there's also some good things coming out of struggle somehow. Like I had to, and I still have to sort of find a way to use this instrument. What is it that I like about music? Why is some music moving me? Why is some music not moving me? Am I good enough on my instrument to make music that, or should I be better? I mean, I remember the first time I was hearing Kurt Rosenwinkel was actually when I was playing in Aarhus with that trio I talked about, and we were playing in a cafe, and Kurt came up. We were playing 26-2, and all of a sudden this guy comes up on stage after my solo, and he asks if he can get my guitar, and I was like, yeah, why not? I mean, he took my guitar and he played a solo, and and he gave me the guitar again, and I played the head, and that was it. And then after the show, he came up to me, and he was really, really into the music, and introduced himself. And I didn't know who he was at that time. It's a long time ago. It's like in 97, 98. So I guess also before Kurt really, like, his popularity sort of exploded in a way. He was out with Brian Blade's band, and I remember meeting him, and I remember hearing. That was for me at least the first time I heard a guitar player that could sort of incorporate all the classical elements of the guitar, classical elements of jazz somehow into that instrument somehow. It sounded like he could have been, he could have played the same things on piano, and it would have reminded me of Brett Meldau maybe, or and it was kind of a shock to hear that was possible for me. Earlier on, I think Pat Martino might have had somehow a similar effect on me. His lines and his way of playing the guitar really reminded me of a horn player somehow, and that was also like, I was dying to be able to play like that. But when Kurt showed up, for me it was like I just lost track completely. I was like, what am I doing? First of all, oh yeah, it is possible to play the things you'd like to play on this instrument. And then second of all, like, are you gonna, when you go down that road, or are you gonna go somewhere else somehow? And I struggled with that for a long time. Also, when I lived in New York and became friends with Kurt, and I was living with Ben Street, and he was also, telling me, showing me things I could do and work on to become better at my instrument. But somehow, at some point down the road, I also started seeing myself as a different musician. And I've always loved John Lee Hooker, and I've always loved like musicians that would play less, and also musicians that weren't able to play like half or even less than what the great jazz players today are playing, and still like they could move me a lot. So it's like what do I like about music? I was like, okay, I have to think about this as well, because I'm not really in it to become great at my instrument. I'm in it to be able to say something, and then hopefully the audience is gonna get something out of it as well. So it's really interesting. I think it's an interesting language.
Well, in closing, let me ask you. We have a lot of young students that are turned on to your music, and what advice do you have for them pursuing a path similar to yours?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I think for me the most important thing is that you can be able to sort of you should. I've always tried. For me, the music has always been the important thing. Like I've always had the sort of desire to express something with sound, and for me, like when I did my first albums, I remember I did an album called Sidetrack. It was like 2004, and I released a lot of albums myself, and I didn't really care if it, for me the process was the important thing. Like I could sort of like move myself. I could be like, wow, this is beautiful. I really enjoy this. It's like a soundtrack to my own life. And then it got released, and it would be sort of helping me get a career as well. But that was never the important thing. The important thing was to find a space where I could create something that meant something to myself somehow. And I think if you can find that, it's a lot of things are gonna sort of come after that by itself somehow.
Well, Jakob, thanks so much for sharing your story today. It's really, really interesting.
Thanks for letting me. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay.
Great.